My name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm 32 years old when I was 7. My stepmother drove me to a children's home in Wiltshire, signed 3 forms, and left me there without saying goodbye. My father had been dead for 11 days. By the following spring, she had transferred the deed to our family home, the home my father bought in 1987, the home I was born in, into her sole name. I was still in that children's home. No one told me. 20-3 years later, I walked into a solicitor's office in Bath with a document she didn't know existed. And I watched her lawyer read it twice before he put it down and asked for a recess. Before I tell you what was in that document, hit subscribe. Hit like, and let's go all the way back to the beginning. Because this story starts in a house that smelled like wood smoke and oranges, and it ends in a courtroom. And everything in between is something I've needed to say out loud for a very long time. I want you to know who I was before any of this happened, because I think that matters. I think you need to know the girl I was so you understand what was taken from her, not just the house, not just the money, but the particular shape of a childhood that belonged to one specific person and was interrupted in the middle. I grew up in a village called Thornbury, just outside Bristol. If you know the west of England, you know the kind of place I mean, narrow roads. A church that goes back 6 centuries, a post office that doubles as a newsagent where Mrs. Hargreaves behind the counter knows your name and your mother's name, and will tell you if your school skirt is too short. The sort of place where summer smells like cut grass and someone else's barbecue, and winter smells like wet wool and wood smoke drifting from half the chimneys on the lane. Our house was called Larkspur Cottage. It wasn't a cottage in any romantic sense. It was a 3-bedroom semi-detached on the edge of the village with a long back garden my father had paved half of for a workshop and left the other half to run slightly wild. He'd planted a pear tree the year I was born. By the time I was 5, it was already taller than me, and he used to stand beside it and say, "See, Becca? You're both growing fine." My father's name was Thomas Lawson. Tom. He was 41 when I was born, which made him seem ancient to me as a child and seems achingly young to me now. He was a carpenter by trade and a reader by habit. He had 2 bookshelves in the sitting room that went floor to ceiling, and were organized by a system only he understood. He made things with his hands for other people all week and then came home and disappeared into books. He smelled like sawdust, and in the evenings, the particular soap he'd been buying from the same chemist in Bristol for 20 years. My biological mother died when I was 3. Her name was Caroline. I don't have real memories of her. Only the photographs my father kept on the mantelpiece and never moved, even later, even when things changed. In the photographs, she is laughing, always slightly turned away from the camera, as if she'd just said something funny and was waiting to see if it landed. My father never talked about her death directly. What he said, when I was old enough to ask, was, she was here, and then she wasn't. And the world got a bit quieter. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed 100 times in private. He raised me alone for 4 years. Just the 2 of us in Larkspur Cottage. And I want to tell you that those 4 years, the ones I can actually remember, were some of the most ordinary and therefore most precious years of my life. He made porridge on school mornings and packed my lunch with a folded note in it every single day. Not always words. Sometimes just a drawing of a bird or a small stick figure waving. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed. I still have that shoebox. He couldn't sing, but he sang anyway. Always slightly wrong. Always with absolute commitment. He taught me to ride a bike in the back lane behind the post office on a Saturday morning in October. He read to me every night until I was old enough to read to myself, and then sometimes read to me anyway because I asked. He took me to the library every fortnight as if it were church. He treated me in every way that mattered, as if I were the most important project he had ever undertaken and the most interesting one. I was a happy child. I want to say that plainly, because I need you to understand that happiness as a baseline, that specific warmth, before I tell you how it ended. I was a child who felt safe. I was a child who knew, without being able to articulate it, that the person responsible for her was paying attention. Asterisk, that is what was taken. Not just the house, Her name was Diane Marsh when my father met her. And she became Diane Lawson when they married in the spring I turned 6. I was a bridesmaid. I have a photograph of me in a pale yellow dress, looking solemn, which is how I apparently looked in all formal photographs as a child. I want to be careful about how I describe Diane, because this story is about what she did, not about some cartoon wickedness. She was not obviously cruel. She was not someone who sneered at me when my father wasn't looking or locked me in my room or was cold in ways I could report. She was more skilled than that. And that's the thing about people like Diane. Their skill is exactly what makes them difficult to name until it's too late. She was 43 when they married. She worked in estate management, property, lettings, that sort of thing, and she was composed in the way that people who manage other people's money for a living tend to be composed. She always wore neat clothes. She had pale blue eyes that were watchful without seeming to be. She called me sweetheart in the first months, which I found uncomfortable, and then stopped calling me anything much when she realized I wasn't warming to it. My father met her at a fundraising dinner for the Village Hall Restoration Fund. He came home that evening later than expected and in a better mood than usual, which I registered because children register everything. He mentioned her casually, a woman he'd been seated next to, interesting, worked in property. That was all. Over the following months, she appeared more. At the pub quiz, at the village fete, at our kitchen table for a Sunday lunch that my father cooked, and she praised with the particular warmth of someone who has decided to be liked. I didn't dislike her at first. I want to be honest about that. I was 6 years old and she brought me a book once, a nice one, a story about a girl who finds a secret door, and I remember feeling grateful for it in the uncomplicated way children feel grateful for things. She talked to my father in the evenings after I'd gone to bed, and I could hear the murmur of conversation through the floorboards, and there was something in that sound that seemed to make my father lighter. He was lonely. I understand that now in a way I couldn't then. He had been alone with his grief and his daughter and his bookshelves for 4 years, and here was someone who paid attention to him. He was a gentle, trusting man. He assumed that people who seemed decent were decent. It was one of the best things about him, and it was the thing that cost him everything. They dated for a year. He proposed at Christmas. He told me about it at breakfast the next morning, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with the pear tree visible through the back window, bare in December, and he said, "Becca, I've asked Diane to marry me, and she said yes. I hope that feels all right to you." And I said something like, okay, because I was 6 and had no framework for what I was agreeing to. And he smiled at me with such relief that I felt, even then, that it was important for him to have that smile. They married in April. She moved into Larkspur Cottage. She brought her things in boxes and placed them around the house with the efficiency of someone who has done this before, or who has thought carefully about how to do it. She repositioned furniture. She bought new curtains for the sitting room. She didn't touch my room, which was perhaps a calculation on her part, or perhaps just lack of interest. She didn't touch the photographs of my mother on the mantelpiece. Not at first. She was polite to me. She was careful. She included me in meals and conversations and outings. But there was always something absent in it, the way you can tell when someone is performing attention rather than giving it. She looked at me the way you look at something that belongs to a room but not to you, acknowledged. Navigated around, not engaged with, she did not love me. I knew it then and I know it now. Whether she ever intended to stay long enough to find out if she could have is something I've wondered about and will never know. The first thing I noticed changing was small. She began having conversations with my father after dinner, when I'd gone upstairs, and when I came down for water or a forgotten book. The conversations would pause in a particular way. Not guiltily, just paused. The way a sentence pauses when it's reached a part that isn't for certain years. I noticed the way children notice things they don't have words for. My father began looking tired. Not unwell, just tired. The lightness she had initially brought to him curdled at some point into something that looked more like effort. He was still kind to me, still present, still sent me off to school with the notes in my lunchbox. But there was something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something he was managing? I did not understand it then. I understand it now. She was rearranging things. Not the furniture. The things that couldn't be seen. My father was diagnosed with a heart condition when I was 6.5, not long after the wedding. I found out much later that he had known about it before the marriage, had been told to monitor it, had been told it was manageable with the right medication and reduced stress. He hadn't told Diane before the proposal, or so she later claimed. Whether that was true, I cannot say. What I can tell you is that in that last year, the year I was 7, my father slowed down. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a tide goes out, so gradually you don't notice until you look up and everything is different. He took fewer commissions. He spent more evenings in his armchair. He still read to me, still made the porridge, still sent the notes. But the notes got simpler. Just a smiley face some mornings. Just a star. Diane managed the house with increasing authority. She handled the bills, the appointments, the phone calls. She said it was to help him rest, and I had no reason then to question that. She was present in all the practical ways and absent in all the ways that counted. And my father was too tired and too trusting to see the shape of what was happening. There was a solicitor in Bath, a man named Mr. Aldridge, whom my father had used for years. I know this because his name appears in documents I found later. My father visited him twice that year that I can confirm. What was discussed, I would not know for 23 years. I remember a Saturday in February, maybe 8 weeks before my father died.
He was having a good day. He had energy, color in his face.
And he took me to the workshop in the garden and showed me how to sand a piece of oak. Not to make anything specific, just to sand it, to feel the grain come smooth under your hands. We stood at the workbench for maybe an hour. And he talked about the pear tree, said it would bear fruit properly this year. Said we'd make something with the pears, a crumble, maybe, or a jam if I wanted to learn jam. He was planning ahead. He was making plans that included me. He put his hand on my head at one point, the flat of his palm, just resting it there. And he said, "You're all right, Becca. Whatever happens, you're all right." I thought he was just being reassuring in the vague way adults sometimes were. I did not know he was saying goodbye. I did not know, at 7, how to recognize a farewell dressed as ordinary comfort. He died on a Thursday morning in March, a cardiac event. He was downstairs when it happened. Diane found him. The ambulance came, but there was nothing to be done. I was at school. A teacher I barely knew came to get me from my classroom and walked me to the headmistress's office, and Diane was there, standing by the window, and she told me my father had died and I needed to come home. I remember the light in that office. I remember the sound of the playground outside, other children's voices. I remember not understanding, not in the immediate sense of the word. The information arrived and then sat somewhere outside me, waiting for me to be ready for it. I was not ready for it for a very long time. The funeral was the following Wednesday. I remember it in fragments. The church, the cold, someone's black coat brushing my face, the smell of lilac which I have not liked since. I remember my father's sister, my Aunt Patricia, who lived in Edinburgh and whom I saw perhaps once a year, holding my hand through the service. I remember Diane standing very still at the graveside. Composed, appropriate, and unreadable face. After the funeral there were people at the house. Adults I mostly didn't know, neighbors, people from my father's professional life. Aunt Patricia stayed for 2 days. She sat with me in my room and we looked at the photographs together, the ones of my mother, the ones of my father when he was younger. She cried. I didn't cry yet. I was still waiting for the information to arrive. Aunt Patricia left on the Friday. She had a train to catch. She hugged me very tightly at the front door and told me she'd be back soon. She told Diane she'd be in touch. Diane nodded with the expression of someone filing information. The following Monday, 11 days after my father died, Diane knocked on my bedroom door in the morning. I was sitting on my bed. I had not been sleeping well. She came in and stood near the door and said, "Rebecca, I've made some arrangements. We're going to take a drive today." She called me Rebecca, not sweetheart. I noticed that now. I asked where we were going. She said, "To somewhere you can be looked after properly." I asked what she meant. She said, "It's better for everyone this way." And she said it in the tone of someone who has already made a decision and is informing you of it, not discussing it. The drive took about 45 minutes. I was in the back seat with my school bag, which she had packed while I was getting dressed, and a small overnight bag with some clothes. I remember watching the countryside through the window. I remember not speaking. I remember the feeling, not panic, not yet, but the premonitory quiet of something that is about to become real. The children's home was called Maple House. It was a large Victorian building set back from the road in a village called Haston, about 12 miles from Thornbury. There was a sign on the gate. There was a woman at the door who smiled at me in the way people smile at children. They've been told to expect. Diane spoke to someone inside. She signed something at a desk. She handed over the overnight bag and then the school bag. She looked at me once, direct, brief, and said, "You'll be fine here." And then she left. She did not hug me. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she would come back. She did not come back. I stood in the hallway of Maple House and watched the door close, and I understood. In that moment, with the complete and devastating clarity that sometimes arrives in the middle of shock, that I had been abandoned. My father was 11 days dead. I was 7 years old. And the woman who had married him, the woman who now had legal access to everything he had left behind, had just signed me away like something she needed to return. I lived at Maple House for 4 years. Then I was placed with a foster family, a kind couple named the Hendersons, in Trowbridge, where I stayed until I was 16. Then I moved into supported accommodation. Then, at 18, I started a university access course in Bristol. At 22, I qualified as an accountant. At 28, I had a flat of my own, a job I was good at, and the particular quiet competence of someone who learned very early that the only person reliably responsible for her was herself. I am telling you this quickly, because I do not want to dwell in the years of absence. What I want you to understand is that I grew up knowing what had been done to me, but not yet knowing all of it. I knew Diane had placed me in care. I knew she had not contacted me again. I knew the house, Larkspur Cottage, the pear tree, the wood smoke smell. The bookshelves was no longer mine to access. What I did not know, until I started looking, was the full shape of what she had taken. I thought about my father throughout all of those years. Of course I did. I carried him with me the way you carry someone who is gone, not always in the foreground, but always present, like a room in the house of yourself that you keep the door to. I thought about the notes in my lunchbox. I thought about the pear tree. I thought about him saying, "Whatever happens, you're all right." And I thought about the fact that what happened was that I was not. For a very long time, all right, at all. When I was 24, I requested access to my care records. This is something you can do as an adult who was in state care. You can ask for the files, the intake forms, the case notes, the records of your time. It took several months and a lot of bureaucratic patience, and what arrived was a large envelope of photocopied documents that I sat with on my kitchen floor for an entire evening. There was Diane's signature. On the intake form, in the box marked relationship to child, stepmother. In the box marked reason for placement, the words she had used were unable to provide adequate care. 11 days after my father died, she had decided she was unable to provide adequate care for me and had driven me to a children's home without telling any of my father's family. Not Aunt Patricia. Not anyone, and then gone back to Larkspur Cottage and carried on with her life. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time. Then I called Aunt Patricia, who was 71, still in Edinburgh, and who started crying before I had finished the first sentence, because she had not known. She told me she had contacted Diane after leaving several times to ask about me. Diane had said I was settled with a relative, and that contact might confuse things. Aunt Patricia had been told. In other words, exactly as much as Diane wanted her to know. Which was nothing true. We talked for 3 hours that night. By the end of it, I had two things. The confirmation that my father's family had been deliberately kept from me, and a question I did not yet have the answer to. The question was this: what had happened to Larkspur Cottage? It took me 2 more years to start looking properly. I don't say that with shame. I say it because grief has its own timetable. And so does courage, and I was working both of those things through in my own time. I was 26 when I requested a copy of my father's death certificate, which I was entitled to as his child. I was 27 when I began trying to find out what had happened to the property. I am an accountant. I understand documentation. I understand paper trails. And I knew, I had known in a vague, uncomfortable way since I was old enough to think about it, that a house doesn't simply vanish. Property leaves records. Ownership changes leave records. Land registry is a public record. I searched Larkspur Cottage on the land registry in March, when I was 28. The search took approximately 4 minutes and cost £3. The house had been transferred in June, 3 months after my father's death, from joint ownership of Thomas Lawson and Diane Lawson to sole ownership of Diane Lawson. Subsequently, Diane Whitmore, following a marriage in 2003, she had remarried. 5 years after my father died, she had married a man named Gerald Whitmore. She was living in Larkspur Cottage under a different name. She had sold it in 2011 for £340,000 and moved, as far as I could determine, to a property in Somerset. I sat with that information for a long time. £340,000. My father's house. My house. The house with the pear tree and the bookshelves and the workshop where he'd taught me to sand oak. Sold. The money absorbed into a life that had no room in it for me. I went back to the records. I searched for my father's will. You can apply to the probate registry for a copy of a will after probate has been granted. It's a public document. I applied. What came back was a grant of probate confirming that Diane Lawson had administered the estate as sole executor. An will dated 1998, before he met Diane, in which he left everything to me, with Aunt Patricia as guardian. A will dated 1998, before the marriage, which meant the question was whether he had updated it, whether he had made a new will after the marriage, as most people are advised to do, because a will made before a marriage is automatically revoked by that marriage in English law. I called a solicitor. She explained it clearly. If my father had not made a new will after marrying Diane in the spring I turned 6, then under intestacy rules, the rules that apply when there is no valid will, Diane, as his surviving spouse, would have been entitled to the first £270,000 of the estate and half of the remainder, with the other half going to me, his child, but I had received nothing. I had been placed in a children's home. So either he had made a new will, one that disinherited me, which seemed impossible given what I knew of him, or there was something else, something that hadn't been found, something that might still exist. I remembered the name, Mr. Aldridge, the solicitor in Bath, whose name appeared in a letter I had found among my father's things, a single letter, kept with his important documents, which Aunt Patricia had retrieved from Larkspur Cottage before Diane had changed the locks, and which she had kept, not knowing why, for 23 years in a box in her spare room in Edinburgh. She posted it to me the week I asked. It was a letter dated January of the year my father died, from a firm called Aldridge and Pemberton Solicitors, Bath, confirming an appointment, confirming in careful legal language that documentation would be prepared as discussed. That was all it said. But it was enough. Aldridge and Pemberton still existed. The original Mr. Aldridge had died in 2008, but his practice had been absorbed into a larger firm, and the records, the files, had been archived. Client files in English law are retained for a minimum of 15 years after the matter closes. My father's file would have been kept significantly longer than that if the matter involved property or estate planning. I called them. I explained who I was. I explained my relationship to the late Thomas Lawson of Thornbury, Wiltshire, and I asked whether they held any records relating to his estate. The receptionist took my details. A solicitor called me back within 2 days. Her name was Margaret Reynolds. She was a partner at the firm, approximately 50 years old, with the particular directness of someone who has spent a career reading between lines. She told me she had located my father's file. She asked me to come in. I drove to Bath on a Tuesday in October. The office was in a Georgian terrace near the center of the city, stone-colored in the autumn light. The kind of building that looks like it has been quietly holding other people's secrets for a very long time. Which, as it turned out it had been, Margaret Reynolds met me in a small meeting room. She had the file on the table, a slim beige folder, aged darkened at the edges. She introduced herself properly, and then she said, very calmly, "Miss Lawson, I've reviewed this file in advance of our meeting, and I think you should know that what's here is significant." I said I was ready to hear it. She opened the folder. My father had visited Aldridge and Pemberton twice in the year he died, once in January and once in February. The month before his death, the same month he took me to the workshop and showed me how to sand oak. At the January visit, he had discussed updating his will and had expressed specific concerns about provision for his daughter in the event of his death. At the February visit, he had executed a new will. She placed a document on the table in front of me. It was a will, dated the 14th of February. My father's signature, witnessed by 2 employees of the firm, notarized, everything properly done. In it, he left Larkspur Cottage and all its contents to Rebecca Carolyn Lawson, his daughter, with Aunt Patricia as executor and trustee until I turned 20-1. Diane Lawson received nothing from the estate, nothing. My father had known. He had known, in those last months, that something was not right. He had updated his will specifically to protect me. He had walked into that solicitor's office and said, "Make sure my daughter is taken care of." He had done everything right. The will had never been presented for probate. Diane had presented the 1998 will, the one that had been automatically revoked by their marriage, the one that was therefore invalid, and had administered the estate on that basis. Receiving everything as the surviving spouse under intestacy, she had known a new will existed. She must have known. My father would not have hidden it from her. He was not that kind of man. And she had buried it, not literally, not in any way that could be proven easily, but she had made sure it never surfaced. But she hadn't known about Aldridge and Pemberton's archive. She had forgotten, or never considered, that solicitors keep copies. I sat across from Margaret Reynolds and I looked at my father's signature on that document, and I didn't cry. I had done my crying in private in the years before this moment. What I felt, sitting in that meeting room in Bath on a Tuesday in October, was something much quieter and much more absolute. It was the feeling of something being confirmed. He had tried to protect me. He had done everything he could. And then he had died before he could tell me where the protection was. I looked at Margaret Reynolds and I said, "What do we do now?" She said, "Now we start a claim." Margaret Reynolds referred me to a specialist in inheritance disputes, a man named David Calloway at a firm in Bristol that handled exactly this kind of case. He was in his mid-40s, methodical in the way that good litigators are methodical. And at our first meeting, he explained what we were dealing with in language I could follow. The legal claim was for fraudulent concealment of a will. Diane Lawson, now Whitmore, had presented an invalid document for probate while being aware that a valid, more recent will existed. She had administered an estate she was not entitled to. She had received the proceeds of a property that should have passed to me. The house had sold for £340,000 in 2011, with interest and adjustments for unjust enrichment. The claim value was significant. He was honest about the challenges. Diane would likely deny knowledge of the second will. My father was not alive to confirm what he had told her. The standard for fraud was high. But, and he said this carefully, we had the will itself, properly executed and witnessed, kept in a solicitor's archive for 25 years. We had the file notes from Aldridge and Pemberton recording 2 visits in the months before death. We had the probate filing that presented the earlier, invalid will. And we had the fact that Diane had signed me into a children's home 11 days after my father's death, which, while not direct evidence of fraud, painted a picture of a woman who had decided very quickly that the inconvenient parts of her new life were best removed. We filed the claim. I am not going to walk you through every procedural step because this video would be 6 hours long and I have lived through it, so you don't have to experience it linearly. What I will tell you is that it took 14 months. That Diane did, as David predicted, deny all knowledge of the second will. That her solicitor tried in the disclosure phase to argue that the archive copy was inadmissible on a technical grounds related to the chain of custody, and that Margaret Reynolds produced documentation that dismantled that argument neatly. That there was a deposition at which I sat across a table from Diane Whitmore for the first time since I was 7 years old. She was 72. She had the same pale blue eyes. She was still composed. She looked at me across the table with an expression that I have thought about many times since. Not guilty, not remorseful, not afraid. Something more like recalculation. The face of someone assessing the situation in real time. Her barrister asked me how I could be certain my father had intended the second will to take precedence, given that it had never been formally introduced in the probate process. I said, because he made it 2 weeks before he died. After a specific conversation with his solicitor about protecting his daughter. And because it is signed, witnessed, and properly executed. And because it says exactly what I'm telling you it says. There was a silence. Her barrister moved on. The settlement was reached 7 months after the deposition. 3 weeks before the case was scheduled to go before a judge. Diane's legal team made contact. They had done the mathematics. The will was valid. The claim was solid. A contested trial risked a judgment that would establish public precedent in terms she did not want. The settlement figure was £310,000, not the full value of the estate. Adjusted, David had told me from the beginning that a negotiated settlement would likely be less than a full judgment, but a certainty rather than a risk. The alternative was a trial that could take another 18 months and cost both sides significantly. Asterisk, I took the settlement. I want to be honest about why, not because I was afraid of the trial, but because I was 32 years old and I had been waiting long enough. I had already won the part that mattered, which was finding my father's will and making it real, making it undeniable. Sitting in a room and watching Diane's lawyer read it twice before asking for a recess. The money was acknowledgement. The money was the legal system saying, yes, this was taken from you. £310,000. My father had written my name on a piece of paper and signed it. They had tried to bury that piece of paper, and it had sat in a solicitor's archive for 25 years, patient, waiting. The way only paper can wait, and then I had found it. Diane Whitmore did not admit wrongdoing in the settlement. That is standard. Her admission, if you want to call it that, was in the settlement itself, in the act of paying rather than contesting. In the calculation her lawyers made that the case was not winnable. I do not know what she told her husband, or her friends, or anyone who knew her. I do not know if she experienced anything that looked like remorse. I found, when it was over, that I was less interested in her inner life than I had expected to be. I had spent years imagining that moment, the confrontation, the accountability, the acknowledgement. And what I discovered is that what I actually needed was the document, not the confession. The will was the truth. The settlement was the consequence. Diane's feelings about it were hers to manage. Aunt Patricia cried when I told her. She cried for a long time. She said Tom would have been so glad. She was 81 by then, still in Edinburgh, still sharp. She said she had always known something was wrong and had never known how to prove it. I told her the proving had taken care of itself. In the end, a solicitor's archive and 25 years of patience. What have I done with the money? I bought a flat in Bristol. It is not Larkspur Cottage, and I have made peace with the fact that it will never be. The cottage was sold in 2011 and is someone else's home, and I have no wish to displace them. I paid off my student debt. I set aside a sum for Aunt Patricia, who needed some support with her care. The rest is in savings, invested carefully, the way an accountant invests money. It is not a fortune. It is what I was owed. I also went back to Thornbury, just to look. I drove past the end of the lane where Larkspur Cottage sits. I didn't stop, didn't knock, didn't need to. I just wanted to see it. It had been repainted. Someone had put a new gate in. The back garden wasn't visible from the road. I don't know if the pear tree is still there. I like to think it is. It would be quite large by now. I want to tell you about something I have in my flat. When I went to Aunt Patricia's to collect the letter, The one from Aldridge and Pemberton. The one that started all of it. She had kept more than just the letter. She had kept a small box of my father's things that she'd taken from Larkspur Cottage before Diane changed the locks. Objects not valuable. A pen he'd particularly liked. A cufflink without its pair. 3 paperback books, with his name written on the inside cover in his particular handwriting. Slightly cramped. Very upright dot in a folded piece of paper, a lunchbox note. One of mine, or rather one of his, written to me. I don't know which morning it was from. I don't know if I ever carried it with me in my bag or if it got left behind somehow. It's a small square of paper, folded twice, slightly worn at the creases. On it he had drawn in blue biro a pear tree, just a rough outline. A trunk and a canopy and 3 circles that are obviously pears, and underneath it, in his upright cramped writing he had written, "For Becca, growing fine, that note is framed on my wall. It is the first thing I see when I wake up," he knew. He did what he could. The paper waited. That is all any of us can do, I think. Do what we can. And trust that the truth is patient enough to outlast the people trying to bury it. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. I mean that. Not as a formula. I mean it the way you mean something when you've been carrying it for a long time and someone has finally sat still long enough to hear it. I want to say something practical before I go. Because I am an accountant and practical things feel important to me. If you are a child or were a child of a parent who has died, and you have reason to believe there is a will you haven't seen, or property that was handled in a way that doesn't feel right, please know that solicitors keep records. Law firms keep archives. Land registry keeps ownership history. These things are public or accessible or obtainable. The paper exists somewhere. The paper is almost always patient. You are entitled to your father's records if you are his child. You are entitled to apply for probate records. You are entitled to ask questions. The system is not always fast, and it is not always kind, but it does, sometimes, tell the truth. And if you have a story, if you've been through something that looked like this, if you've been on the wrong side of a family that decided your inconvenience was something to be managed away, I would really like to hear it. Leave it in the comments. I read them. I'm not going anywhere. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. Like if this one reached you. And to my father, Thomas Lawson, who made the notes and planted the tree and walked into a solicitor's office 2 weeks before he died to make sure I would be all right. You were right. I am.